Welcome to Revenue Mind, a podcast that gives revenue leaders a platform to talk about mental health. I'm personally a big advocate of mental health and hope these insights, stories, and guts to open up, inspire, enlighten, and resonate with you. Now on to the episode. I'm Jolie, your host, and a big welcome to our guest, Anthony Kennada. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I know you're lovingly called AK. Where'd that come from?
Good question. No one in my life has ever called me AK until I took a sales job at a tech company. And then at Box, first real job out of college, it stuck. But what was weird is that it followed me. I never really referred myself as AK, but it followed me from job to job. And so it became this persona more than anything else. But everyone in my personal life calls me Anthony, but we'll take AK too.
Love that. Before we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. On the personal side, husband, father, husband of 10 years. We just celebrated 10-year wedding anniversary. I've got two little kids at home. My daughter, Sienna, is 5. My son, Win, is 3. I love being a dad and watching them grow up. Professionally, I fell into SaaS. I don't know if anyone like their whole lives dream of becoming SaaS marketers, but I fell in through a failed entrepreneurship journey after college at Gainsight, where I was the first kind of marketer in pre-revenue, a very small company. Grew that to about 100 million of ARR before leaving, about 7 years. Really fell in love with the idea of authentic human marketing. So I'm really excited about our conversation today. In a world where a lot of the marketing tactics were outbound and transactional, like I found that relational marketing actually helped drive revenue in a very sustainable and efficient way. And so brought that with me to Front and Hopin before starting my own company, all about this idea of building trusted relationships with your audience and turning that into revenue at AudiencePlus. So we're about 2 years in and really excited about what we're building.
I love that. That's awesome. So now on to the question. So you mentioned experiencing significant health scares and personal
Yeah.
challenges that have deeply affected you. Could you share how these experiences have shaped your personal and professional perspective?
Yeah. The last 4 years in particular, definitely the last 1 year, have been the hardest in my personal life ever. It started about 4 years ago where I had my own health scare where I could spend 60 minutes talking about this very topic, but basically my heart went out of rhythm into a arrhythmia called AFib, atrial fibrillation, which is not common for people in their early 30s at the time, which really was for someone that's been generally healthy their whole lives. Hearing you have a heart issue is pretty traumatic. So a very long story there. In the last year, my daughter, who's like first child, daddy's girl, I'm a girl dad, like self-identify as a girl, unfortunately suffered like 3 seizures, which we couldn't really find the source of. And we think we have now, and knock on wood, it's been about a year now since she's had one. So we're hoping she's outgrown it. But for any parents who have had children that are either epileptic or have really had seizures, there's probably nothing more visually traumatic. And then within this last year, my wife was pregnant with our second daughter, so our third child. And it was a kind of a difficult pregnancy and climaxed in a moment where we actually lost my daughter 2 weeks before she was supposed to be born. And so not early pregnancy, fully formed human, like ready to be born. And we almost lost my wife in the process. And this was back in November. So all this was the background for also starting a company, venture scale business, doing exceptionally hard things of trying to lead a company through building a new software category, a new movement, generating pipeline, like all of the things we have to do, going from 0 to 1 in a product process, which in a world of just like everything being fine is hard enough. And so having to battle my own insecurity for my own anxiety around my heart, fear of what was happening with my daughter, uncertainty on the future of my second daughter, and trauma and uncertainty with my wife's health. It's a lot to really be carrying that emotional and mental load and then coming to work in a way almost as a distraction, which is not healthy. Having to you got investors that are betting on you. You have customers that need you to deliver on what you said you were going to do and to carry that weight. You have a team that's looking to you for inspiration and for guidance. having to carry that weight has been like extremely difficult and challenging. And so I'd say in the former, the mental health component, or there's some learnings from that. I'm probably still processing a little bit of the grief and how do you really move forward through grief and be a leader. But maybe the learnings are one and the same in the sense that there is so much that we don't control. And you think about just how much in our bodies to keep us alive that we don't have a sort of cognitive control. So your heart rhythms, your breathing, like all of these types of things. And so when you're in marketing or in any sort of revenue role, entrepreneur, like you're focused on controlling as much as you possibly can. And then these moments happen and you're like, wow, we really don't control anything, do we? And so if anything, what I've learned, which has not been an overnight process by any stretch of the imagination, is the beauty in surrender, in surrendering our need to control everything and having some trust and faith that you're going to be okay. And there's things that, on the other end of this pain and this suffering that is going to build that perseverance within you. And so you have to hang on to that hope to get through some of those dark moments. But that's been, I think, certainly the learning from the personal health struggle.
You so much. I remember in a prep call, I'm almost teared up just in hearing that. I am so sorry for everything you went through, but it's really brave of you to share your story. And it's rare and refreshing to see men, just in general, openly discuss mental health. What inspired you to talk today and break the silence and share your story?
A couple of things. One is we're big believers in media and podcasting and everything, and I do several of these. And as I do these conversations, almost every talk track is the same, which is honestly part of the gig, right? We're trying to evangelize a new movement, a new way of marketing, and sticking to the script and like getting that story told in front of as many audiences is like a part of the strategy. But underneath it all is this reality that I'm living in, and I don't have an avenue to tell that story. I think all of us maybe have been on the other end of like toxic vulnerability where people are like, hey, I'm going to use this hurt and this pain as like a marketing moment. And I was really encouraged by just what you were building in the sense of it's not what this is, but maybe to your point in the question, maybe I know I'm not alone. I know there's other people that are going through worse things than what I'm going through. There's people in my community and extended network that are going through much worse things than what we went through. I understand that. And I don't think grief or pain or suffering is like weighted. I think it's important for people to hear that behind every vanity post on LinkedIn, everything's okay, or crushing it, blah, 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 are real human beings that are doing the best they can with the information they have and trying to make an impact in whatever they're trying to do at work while also holding it together and trying to invest in what matters more than work, which is ourselves, our families, and all of that. So anyway, that was for me. It's yes, I want owned media to be the future of marketing and for everyone to talk about it, but I'd much rather, as part of that, be honest and authentic, and hopefully help people wherever they are in their journey with grief, with suffering, with medical kind of challenges, to know that they're not alone.
It's amazing. That's why I started this podcast. You hit the
Mhm.
nail on the head. I wanted to give our community an avenue to know that everyone wasn't alone.
Yeah,
Because actually, I deleted Instagram and Facebook
yeah,
because I was doom scrolling.
yeah,
It's everyone's perfect moment, and it's ridiculous. And LinkedIn is just it can be that, but for professionals. So
yeah.
thank you for sharing
It's
that.
funny. One observation I have: you look on LinkedIn, and I think there's a lot of like insecurity being a founder, especially a first time founder, where you're like, you see all these other companies and they're just posting like things and it looks like everyone's killing it right now. And then I have conversations with companies more successful than those companies and their CMOs or whoever are like, nothing is working, everything is hard, and I'm worried about my job. And you're like, what, what is LinkedIn having its Instagram moment in that way where
Yeah.
we're all pretending that pipeline is just flowing, like deals are coming in, like it's all good. The reality is I don't think it is right now. I think there's a lot of ideas on how we can get better, but just like the veneer built on creating this perception that everything's great on our Instagram lives. I think that's making its way into the workplace a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely think so.
Yeah.
And just want to pivot a little bit. So journey of an executive and founder comes with very unique pressures. And that kind of ties into LinkedIn with everyone's perfect moment.
Yeah.
How have your experiences with health and your family crises influenced your leadership and decision making in high stress environments?
One, and I don't mean this to sound patronizing to any amazing revenue operators, marketers, sales professionals listening to this. But before I started the company, I was like, I work my butt off as a CMO. Like, it can't be harder than this. There's no way. And then you hear all the tropes around the CEO saying, oh, it's the loneliest job in the world. And you're like, okay, how lonely can, like, it's pretty lonely as a CMO. I don't get invited to the happy hours that my teams are hosting. Like, they don't want me there. Turns out it's actually quite hard and quite lonely. Again, even in a season where everything was fine, because it's not a great market out there. You're burning cash every month. So every dollar you're investing is a dollar closer to the death of the company, right? You're building products that, as a non-technical founder, I don't know how to build. Like, I need a partner in an engineering kind of leader to actually help me deliver the value. Customers are taking a chance on you when you're that early, which means a lot of disappointment, a lot of conversations you have to navigate through to say, hey, we can get you the thing you want. You give it to them, it's broken, and they're mad. You got to fix it. And so it's like really a lot of heightened pressure that you end up tying a bit to your, like, I don't think it's healthy, but you end up in your worst moments tying your success to your identity. And so with the CMO, it's like, oh, this is Nick's company, or this is like point to the founder's company. Here, you're like, if this fails, like, this is on me, on my reputation. Anthony's a great CMO, but not a CEO, not a founder. And so you're chasing that ghost a little bit. So I think that in and of itself is pretty tough. Add in some of this complexity and you ask yourself some of these existential questions. What am I doing? Like, in addition to this being very hard and our family going through a lot, I took a like 60, 70% pay cut to start the company. So there's financial pressure on the family. And you're working weekends. Like this weekend, we're doing like an early birthday for my son and daughter. And I'm like, great. I also have to finish my keynote deck for a conference that we're hosting in 10 days. So I'm like, all right, wake up at 5 and I'll work on it. And I'll be present with the kids. And then when they go to bed, I'll keep working on it. And you're like, okay, how present can I be as a human being? Like, when I'm sandwiching in this amazing, beautiful life moment in between this short term deliverable that I and only I can actually build and do. That's the hard part. How does that influence leadership? That's a long way to get to your question. I just don't know yet. I think I am balancing the stress of having a healthy relationship with work as a founder versus setting boundaries as an operator. Because anyone that tells you if you're an early stage company, your first couple years in operation and you can shut off your brain and just go have a weekend, it's like a disease. It's like a drug being a founder. You can't do that. You want to. It's good that you can and you try and you work for it, but you can't. I can't ask that of all my employees. Like, they're just not as incentivized as I am as the person who started the company. So I think I'm balancing that sort of relationship between work and personal, having heightened appreciation for how important my family is and seeing my children growing up, investing in them, being a father, being a husband, and setting a high bar for excellence delivery and meeting our obligations to our shareholders and our customers and ourselves. So maybe the takeaway is there's no perfect answer here. And if we did this interview maybe in 6 months, I'll have an enlightened kind of application of it. I think explore this interaction, the type of company you want to build, the type of culture you want to operationalize at your company that creates space for those who are grieving, those who are suffering, those who are struggling, knowing that it will happen. It happened to me in this first 2 years, but I think the hard part of life is that it's going to happen to all of us. And so we need to be mindful of that as we're crafting culture. And I think maybe the takeaway is this experience has softened my heart around that and will help us figure out ways to scale it going forward.
That's amazing. Actually, when I got let go from my job a couple months ago, I realized that my entire identity was wrapped up in what I was doing. And then I
Yeah.
realized, wait a second. I also have a killer basketball shot. I also sing. I also am a friend, a
Yeah.
daughter, sister, and you just realize I'm more than this.
Totally.
Yeah, it's a wake up call.
I really hope that what we're experiencing as part of this maybe awakening around mental health and all of this in the workplace, more vulnerability, more transparency. I really hope we attack this like work identity problem that exists because our culture, our media, we have really created this moment, this understanding that we are our job title. If I don't reach a certain career milestone by a certain age or have a certain amount of money in the bank or a certain amount of status, that I have failed in my sort of self actualization path. I really hope we attack that. And the way we do that is not to demonize work and say, oh, work is bad. That is not who I am. So I'm not going to invest in finding a great job or building my career or whatever. That's not the answer either. Where I hope we land is being able to put our identity in some type of higher calling, whatever that is for you, whether it's your relationships, whether there's a faith tradition that you ascribe to, whether it's a community that you're a part of, putting your faith in something that is a bit more fulfilling, and then seeing work as a responsibility in playing your part in that higher calling, a way to contribute to it. And there's many things that are part of that, right? It's not just your day job. Work is important. It plays a role in the sort of actualization of our purpose, but it can't be our purpose. I think that's where the danger is. So I know there's a lot of gray area in that terminology, but my sense is like thinking about putting work in its rightful place in the hierarchy of my life. That's ultimately, I think, the healthy boundaries that we need to create, or where I hope
Definitely.
we end up.
I hope we're on our way. And I
Yeah,
think you sharing your story is just one step toward that, which is
hope
amazing.
so.
So, reflecting on the profound impact that the challenges that you opened up about on your mental health, what were some of the coping mechanisms or support systems that have helped you to rebuild and move forward?
Probably different for the different chapters. Of chapter one was my own health struggle, and chapter two, our loss of our in our family. I think one commonality, we have a faith tradition that we believe in, and so connecting to our higher power, prayer, these types of things help, in my belief, add to this surrender thing that says, I am not in control. And what we believe in, is that there is someone who is in control of this, and this pain has a purpose. That has been helpful, especially literally tying like the giving up of control. Like anxiety is effectively like the shadow side of control in a way that you're like, I need to control the outcome of the future. And I'm afraid if I don't do it, then this like intrusive something else will happen. And even if it's not rooted in truth or reality. And so I think anchoring in something greater has been one of the biggest contributors. Second is really the community. I'm an only child, divorced home I grew up in. So I was a kid that played by himself and imagined, dreamed dreams, that sort of thing. I'm totally okay being like a lone ranger type of a thing. Thankfully, I met my wife who is also somewhat in that way. And so we're totally cool being hermits and not going out or like anything. Probably a bad thing. And one thing we found is that in our greatest moment of need, our community really stepped up. So we saw both folks that are our close kind of circle of friends really show up for us in ways that we did not expect. And that shined a light on this idea that I think we're a communal species. We're meant to live not isolated, but we're meant to live in community. And so seeing having people check in on you, having people like, and we would feel so awkward about this if we're any other circumstance, drop off food or be on a start a text chain, like those types of things, like overwhelmed us in a good way and made it feel like we weren't alone in going through what we were going through. So I would say in my life, it was faith and community that really helped and continues to help us kind of process and get through or whatever get through means. I don't know what that means, but to go forward every day.
What resonated with me there, so I have friends in program, and what you're talking about, relinquishing to the higher power. So one of my friends was in program or she's still in recovery, but did the
Mm.
12 steps. And, and her higher power was connection.
Mm.
And the power of connection really drove it home for her. The
Wow.
power of community, and just it really saved her. She probably would have done something to the point where
Wow.
she would have either not wanted to live or done something that put her in that kind of position. So if it's addiction or if it's life, really hard.
Yeah. And it's probably worth the listener knowing it's very hard, and I fail at it every day. I am someone who identifies as being a highly anxious person. And so this is my like cross to bear in this life is being my default mode is anxious and needing to be intentional about giving up control. And a lot of that warfare happens in your brain. It's all like this intrusive thought. Like I was driving yesterday, had a really good day, felt pretty good. My wife sent me this Instagram about this 34-year-old that was totally healthy, and then they discovered something and they died like a month later. And I'm like, my day is ruined. My whole day is ruined. Literally, because now I'm like, something's wrong with me. I feel healthy. Like, what, I haven't been to the doctor in a little bit. And I start spinning down that path. And I can't tell you that I had a smooth recovery from it. It was maybe one of my weaker moments yesterday, but I was on my way to a speaking event. I had to
Wow.
pull it together and be like, okay, not thinking about that, compartmentalizing that anxiety. I'll process and deal with that later. Right now, I'm going to focus on what I have now. And these are some tools I've learned in therapy and in other places. But giving up control is, for those that are anxious, probably the hardest thing you'll have to do in your life.
Yes, completely agree. And the unknown for people with anxiety is the bane for anxious people. It's
Yeah,
just, it's horrible because
yeah,
you want to
agreed.
control literally everything in your life and you don't know what's coming next.
I
And
get
then you're like,
married. Is this the right
what?
person? Yeah, it's hard. It is
But
so hard. In my therapy journey, what I have learned is a lot of that being formed by our lived experience from, of course, how deep you subscribe to it. But a lot of it is our experiences in our childhood that we had very little control over in and of itself that have formed us in our adulthood now. And these things sometimes being pretty dormant for years. And then all of a sudden you're met with an experience and everything is unpacked from that lived experience. The other thing I've realized too is anxiety being fairly symptomatic. Now I wear this Apple Watch mainly because I'm terrified about my heart and hyper vigilant with my heart rate. But there were a couple of years after my experience with the medical trauma, my resting heart rate was 10 to 15 beats higher than it is today. And I'm not saying I'm like the model health and wellness expert right now by any means. It just naturally over time, as I've processed a lot of the trauma specifically from that experience, my body reacted and is getting back to a better place. So this idea of the body keeps the score and a very symptomatic type of anxiety, that's very real too. So don't feel like it's your fault either that you're got these intrusive thoughts, that you're obsessing over the future or these outcomes. Like this is stuff that very much happened in most cases without your direct input, stuff that happened to you, likely that have contributed to that. At least that's my understanding of the psychology here, and very true of my experience for sure.
so how did you put on a game face with showing up to work with everything like your medical
Yeah.
experience and then your family? How did you do it? Because I don't know if I could.
Yeah. On the medical trauma, a lot of that was, again, I was an operator. It was during the pandemic for the most part. It was like December 2019 when that happened, and it's happened again twice since. And so in that world, it was easier to hide a little bit, hide the real and hide behind the Zoom screen and the Slack commute channels and find a way to get through. Plus, we just had as an industry had so much of our own professional trauma during those 2 years that like it was one thing on a longer list of things that we were all wrestling with, layoffs and figuring out how to work remotely, all these sorts of things. The recent experience here with the loss that we experienced while I was an entrepreneur was pretty difficult. So part of it, I think, was this was something we were living every day. Like every day, the quote to my wife was, "Every day you're still pregnant is a miracle." And we lived in that unknown for about 2 to 3 months towards the tail end of the pregnancy. And so my wife was in the hospital for about over a month and a half, probably. And I would be the primary parent at home, waking the kids up, getting them dressed, feeding them breakfast, feeding lunch, take her to school. Thankfully, we had some grandparents' help after I gave up. Basically, I'm like, I can't do this alone. I think mom's so hard. I cannot do it alone. So eventually got some more support. But work in that season was a bit more of a escapism where I can be dealing with stuff at home, but then go to work and try my best to put the game face on. It's not really happening. And then you go back home and of course it is. it hit sort of an acute moment where in November, there was literally a stretch of 3 or 4 days where we made a very hard decision about parting ways with my co-founder, announcing it to the company, announcing on that same day that we were going to re-architect the entire platform. So rewrite every line of code of what we've built so far with the product, announcing that this new kind of person that I was trusting to take over was going to take the reins of engineering, product, and design going forward. Meanwhile, I was fundraising during this time. That was on a Wednesday. On a Thursday, my daughter passed away. My wife was saved, basically. We go home on Saturday. On Sunday, that person who I to take over the reins quit without any, like, not 2 weeks notice, not anything, like, immediately walked out the front door. And so I'm, like, now personally and professionally broken on Sunday, and I had to go to work on Monday morning. There was no grieving period. There's no bereavement. There was no, I'm gonna take 2 weeks and process and come back, because at this point, we hadn't raised any additional capital, so we were on a path to running out of money, and I had no engineering leader and frustrated engineers and a product that had to be rebuilt. And so I literally thought I was pulling it together by my own strength. Monday morning, 8 a.m., I open up Zoom and I just lost it. I just started bawling once the boxes started getting populated, because I knew they knew what I was going through and had gone through. But once I saw their faces, I just broke any sort of mask or game face that I could possibly put forward as a human being. So that was, I think, the moment that I was like, there's no way to lead with a game face at this point. There's no hiding. All I can do is go forward. And thankfully, a few weeks later, we had Christmas and New Year's, and so I did take a little bit of time off to grieve, or whatever that means. But the game face, I think, can work when, as an operator, I think, and if you want to, you don't have to, but if you wanted to, especially in a remote work setting, when you're literally the person that your team is looking to and there's no one else and it's all on the line. I guess my breaking on that Zoom call was evidence that there was no way it was going to work this time around.
It's about being human. So that's really brave that you were able to be so forthcoming with your coworkers.
What they tell you about grief, which I never understood or expected, I didn't get on that call planning to cry.
Yeah, of course
Like,
not.
I just literally, it hit you out of nowhere. And I still experience that today, where there's days that I'm like totally okay, grateful that my wife's alive and here and all of that, but still really sad about what happened. But then there's other times where I can be like totally happy in a normal situation. I'll hear my daughter's name or whatever the case is, and you're just like crushed. And that was my experience. What happened on that call? I didn't go in being like, I'm going to set the tone. I'm going to show them vulnerability. I'm going to whatever. This is a teaching moment for leadership. No, I just it came out.
You ended up teaching
So
them something.
hope so.
Yeah. And given your openness, since a lot of people do about what you're going through, what changes or initiatives would you like to see in the workplace to support mental health and make it easier for everyone like you did to show up and be their authentic selves?
I'm encouraged, since I've started in this SaaS game about 15 years ago, to see a lot of resources pouring in to companies. I think about like the modern healths of the world or the gym passes. And I think a lot of employers are taking the idea of creating pathways and resources for folks to seek help when they need it. They're taking that seriously, and that's being invested in. And it's almost feels like almost like the bar at this point for how employers can help support their team. So I won't tackle that problem because I think that problem is being tackled. I'm just thinking about people that are coming to my mind right now who are household names in our industry who I've just happened to build a relationship with over the years, who are just fundamentally broken right now. And I don't know what to do with that. What change can we instrument to protect our teammates from the human experience and all of that, all of kind of what happens there. So I don't have a silver bullet, but one of the things that I would hope is that we can create cultures that are aware of the idea that there's seasons of life that are really great and awesome, and there's seasons of life that are difficult, and that especially if you're scaling a team with multiple people, there's the probabilities are someone at some point is going through something really hard at your company. And so there's probably something around awareness. There's probably something around culture. in the sense that, so are we creating a space where someone, and maybe for this audience that's carrying a pipeline target or carrying kind of a number on their back, can raise their hand and say, I I cannot go to work right now, and that might be okay. And again, how do you balance that? As you got a number to hit, you got a quota to meet, and that person's really important. I don't know. Like, these aren't questions that are really easy necessarily, but creating a space where we can have dialogue around those questions. Then maybe a part of it is sharing your story. I'm really encouraged by this podcast because I think we need to hear more um, stories that are very real, that break through the LinkedIn veneer and creates this sense of, the cheesy thing is it's okay not to be okay. That's like a meme at this point. But like, it's very real to
It's
not
so
be okay.
true.
Like,
So
it's
true.
real. It's real. And we gotta put a paycheck on the table, and we've gotta provide. Like, if we could all go and retire and not worry about money, then great. Maybe we'd all do just like passion projects and 501(c)(3) work and all of that. But we've got to contribute. And so this is a balance that is a tension point for every human being that is of the working age and working. And so, how do we as employers just create awareness and some empathy and grace around this, the human kind of struggle? I think that's really where the dialogue or the brainstorm should probably begin.
Yeah, I completely agree. And thank you so much for sharing. Actually, something that happened to me at a former company. So my uncle, my mom's brother, passed away, and my dad was also getting a surgery for a
Mm,
medical condition. So
mm,
I didn't ask for help from my teammates. And
yes.
I think a lot of us don't want to admit that we need support.
Yep.
And that was to my detriment. I
Mm,
completely agree. It needs to be a space where it's okay to be like, hey, I'm not okay. I need you to step in because I can't do this right now.
yeah. Yeah. I wonder if there's this tie into the control thing, right? Where it's, I
So
can figure this out, which
yeah,
is probably my downfall, is I don't need help. I can figure this out. Only child, self-starter, like, I'll get through this too. But then you reach the end of the rope at some point where you're like, I've got emotional bandwidth to figure out the basic things, let alone carrying this target or running that sales call effectively or hosting that QBR or running the pipeline meeting, whatever. And you got to ask for help. You got to do that's maybe the first steps to surrender, is saying, I can't do this on my own. I need help. I wonder.
definitely one program, it's admitting that you're powerless over XYZ substance. And
Yeah.
then, like I talked before, you lean on the people that maybe not going through the exact same thing as you, but they can at least understand on an emotional level your struggle. Yeah, this has been great. Anything else you'd like to leave our listeners with?
No, again, you're not alone. I think that's the thesis, the subtitle of my story, at least. But I appreciate the opportunity to share and to have a platform to share my journey. And if anyone else is struggling to feel empowered to reach out, I don't have all the answers for sure, but happy to point you into what I'm learning along my journey as well. So thank you so much for giving me a platform to tell my story.
Of course. Thank you so much, Anthony. Thanks for listening to Revenue Mind. If you enjoyed what you heard, leaving a review would be super helpful in getting this out into the world. If you're looking for support, you can join our Slack community that focuses on mental health for professionals. Just DM me on LinkedIn, I'll send you the invite. See you next time.